a congregation of the world's most sought-after enterprises, took place in London today as the Prime Minister spoke to over £40 billion worth of potential investment, promising to make Britain the place in which to invest and do business. Here's what he said.
In times like this, economic growth is vital, as it's always been, if we're to steer our way through a great period of insecurity and change and on to calmer waters. Because when working people benefit from that growth, when every community enjoys the fruits of wealth creation, it stops a country turning in on itself and against the world.
Remarkably, for a regulatory socialist, the Reverend Starmer sounded almost Farage-like as he talked about the virtues of a bonfire of bureaucracy in the hope of removing obstacles to growth.
We will rip up the bureaucracy that blocks investment. We will march through the institutions and make sure that every regulator in this country, especially our economic and competition regulators, take growth as seriously as this room does.
However, it doesn't seem all those attending were convinced by the PM's flirtation with the free market. The chief executive of Google, Eric Schmidt, did not hold back when holding an in-conversation event with the Prime Minister.
I was shocked when Labour became strongly in favour of growth.
Wealth creation is the #1 mission of a Labour government.
Did you hear that?
Well, not a great start for Investment Summit when a potential investor doesn't even believe you care about growth. The Labour government claims it's all about growth and investment, but their actions tell a very different story. They're talking about investment, yet at the same time, they're itching to slap more regulations and costs on employers, making it harder to run businesses efficiently and making people less likely to take people on to create jobs. Last week saw proposals to make it harder to employ people, and this week the talk is of making it more expensive by extending employers' national insurance contributions. And then there's this obsession with the EU. They want a so-called reset with Brussels, with David Lammy meeting EU officials earlier today. It's clear they're more interested in placating European bureaucrats than standing up for British interests. The reset is essentially trying to reverse the Brexit gains and, crucially, fall back into the high-cost, low-growth EU's regulatory clutches. As for national insurance contributions, Rachel Reeves talks with a forked tongue. The manifesto clearly said, quote, "We will not raise the rates of national insurance," unquote. Even Paul Johnson, the director of the Institute of Fiscal Studies and by no means a Tory, said to increase them would be a straightforward breach of Labour's promise. It also has important economic consequences. It increases the cost of employment without boosting productivity. This leads to less job creation and slower growth. To leak these proposals during an investment summit just shows how incontinent this government's efforts at communications are. Let's look at what Reeves said to GB News' Christopher Hope.
On the budget, your manifesto says we will not increase national insurance, but you're looking at increasing employers' national insurance. Aren't you breaking your manifesto pledge with that?
Well, you've read our manifesto, and in black and white it said we will not increase taxes on working people, and that was national insurance, income tax and VAT.
But not employers?
That was not in the manifesto.
That's absolutely not true, is it? It said we will not raise the rates of national insurance. So I think Ms Reeves should go back to school and learn to read once again, because Labour isn't interested in real growth or indeed in telling the truth. It's more focused on expanding government controls, re-engaging with the EU and making it harder for businesses to thrive. And it's the rest of us who will suffer. As ever, let me know what you think, melmog@gbnews.com. But I'm now joined by an enormously successful businessman, the founder of Carphone Warehouse and the chairman of the National Portrait Gallery, David Ross. David, thank you for coming in.
Good evening, good evening, Jacob, and it's very nice to see you.
You're a businessman. What would you like to see that would increase growth?
Well, firstly, I think it's fair to say that a lot of businesses have been very heartened by the sort of messages that were coming out of the government today. And they're clearly going down a route of encouraging businesses to believe that Britain is open for business and that they want inward investment. And to listen to it, you'd almost have thought that could have been David Cameron and George Osborne, because that was the sort of agenda they proposed. The issue is, with the upcoming budget, the government is going to have some stark choices, because ultimately business needs a low tax, low regulatory environment in order that it can get on and do business. And as you pointed out, grow productivity. making employment more expensive, making employment less flexible and more complicated does not help businesses grow the economy, employ more people, and fundamentally it doesn't help drive productivity within the economy. Driving productivity involves higher skilled jobs, getting more people doing more productive jobs in order to improve our overall gross domestic product per head. Simply growing gross domestic product in a growing population environment doesn't help us grow gross domestic product per head, which fundamentally underlines everybody's financial well-being. So I think between now and the end of October, I think the Prime Minister and the Chancellor have got some real decisions to make about whether they believe growth is their number one point on the to-do list, or whether employment rights and taxation is the number one thing on the to-do list. And I very much hope that it's growth and productivity, because with growth and productivity will come better employment rights and more high-quality jobs.
And if you were to be positive from the government's point of view, it's done quite well. It's got Google here, it's got lots of major investments, Goldman Sachs, people representing £40 billion worth of potential investment. It's managed to kiss and make up with P&O and get them to attend the conference. Is that an achievement? Is that the sort of thing that the Conservatives would have been able to do, or is it a new government that's drawing this interest?
Look, I think that the previous government was pretty ambitious in terms of bringing new investment into the United Kingdom, but that, in a way, was their job because that was their mantra. I think what's impressive here is that a Labour government has made a clear statement that it wants to attract inward investment, and it has gone and approached all of the sort of people that you would hope to be coming in. You know, now, infrastructure, clearly, there's a huge amount of latent capital available in the infrastructure funds and in infrastructure generally. In order to make that money want to come here, though, you have to have a very clear modus operandi and understanding between the investors and the government as to what is an appropriate level of return, what is an appropriate employer-employee relationship. So there'll still be some work to do to get that money from being in a fund to being invested in the UK.
And in some sense, we're at a bit of crossroads now, aren't we? Because you've got one part of the government saying we're really keen to get investment, and you've got a budget looming, and you've got employment proposals that are anti-growth, and that they will have to decide between now and the 30th of October which way they're going to go.
I absolutely agree with you on that particular point. I think we've got two slightly different narratives coming out. One is we're pro-growth, pro-investment, and the other is we're pro making employment rights more restrictive and making it more expensive to employ people. And sometime between now and the 30th of October, I think some very tough decisions are going to have to be made.
How important is the employment issue? Because we've got broadly full employment. We've been bringing in lots of immigrants to fill vacancies. Is it actually beneficial to make employment a little bit harder because it cools the employment market? And to your point, it will stop attracting people from overseas who tend to get low-wage jobs. It might help boost GDP per capita?
I'm not sure I would look at it in that sense. If I look at one of the greatest hiring experiences I've had in my life, which was to recruit people in, we recruited a lot of young graduates into Carphone Warehouse, gave them great training, paid them salaries well in excess of what they might have earned anywhere else. That wasn't because of restricted employment practices. That was because of the freedoms that were available in the early 90s and late 90s to recruit young people, give them great opportunities, pay them fairly, and give them opportunities way beyond any government regulation would have said. So my own view is that we should be encouraging these high-quality jobs to come into this marketplace. And the reality is, as an international employer, you can seek to put your business in Ireland, where you get a very low regulation, low tax regime. You can put it in the United Kingdom, or you can put it elsewhere in Europe. Capital and employment are mobile. Quality of talent and capital are mobile. And these people will make investments wherever they see the most flexible and appropriate regime through which they can make money. But the idea that employers are not committed to giving the best deal possible to their workforce, I think, is not fair and undermines the value of UK employers.
And investors will look to their net return, won't they? So that's after any taxes. So every time you put taxes up, companies have to get a better price, otherwise it's not worth investing in a particular country?
I mean, whether you're putting up national insurance, employers' national insurance, or whether you're putting up capital gains tax, the reality is that capital requires a return. It's a fact of life that capital requires a return, and the market will seek those economies in which it can find the most predictable and most appropriate rate of return. And I don't think the idea that capital has a rate of return is at odds with wanting to recruit and retain the best employees possible. You know, in order to make a return, we need great people and we need to treat them fairly. We need to train them and equip them for the workplace. But at the same time, if you invest £1 to get £2 and 50p of it goes back to the government, and that's a 5-year investment, that becomes quite a limited investment for a number of the funds that are thinking about these sort of, that are looking at these sort of investments.
And this ties in as a final thought with the promise of stability, because investors want to know that if they invest today, it'll be the same tax regime in 5 years' time, and they won't get windfall tax and sudden increases in taxation that distort their investment objectives.
I think in terms of stability, one of the great things that the government say we should be able to do is make long-term commitments on tax rates. It makes investment so much easier, and it also makes us as a country so much more attractive. If you can say, this is your employer's national insurance rate, this is your capital tax, this is your rates, etc., and that's committed for the investment period. It makes us a lot more attractive as an investment proposition.
Well, David, thank you for coming in. It's absolutely wonderful to have somebody on who actually knows how to create jobs rather than politicians who just talk about it.